You finally hit that five-figure mark, $10,000. It sits there on your banking app, glowing in crisp white pixels against the dark mode background. For the first time in years, the knot in your chest loosens. That crushing, invisible gravity of anxiety lifts slightly. You sleep a little deeper, you walk into work a little taller. The wolf is no longer clawing at your front door, he's just prowling down the street. But here's the hard, visceral truth that nobody in finance tells you. You are experiencing an illusion. You are standing on a false summit. You feel safe, but you have actually entered a state of dangerous paralysis. This is a zone I call financial purgatory. You have enough money to handle a flat tire, but not enough to handle a career pivot. And because you have that small pile of cash, you become terrified of losing it. You still can't take real risks. You still can't say no to toxic bosses because the gap between employed and unemployed still looks like a cliff edge rather than a valley. You feel like you are one crisis, one blown transmission, one unexpected medical diagnosis away from the house of cards collapsing back into dust. That $10,000 feels like a shield, but in reality, it is a set of handcuffs. You stop scrambling to survive, but you were too afraid to thrive. So you keep saving, you push forward, and then you hit 20,000. This is where the story actually begins, because the jump from 10,000 to 20,000 is psychologically violent. It isn't just more of the same security. It isn't just math. It is your brain crossing a bridge into an entirely different category of existence. This is the exact moment where money stops feeling like a defensive shield and starts feeling like offensive weaponry. Think of it this way. $10,000 is a shield. It blocks hits. It keeps you alive. But you have to hold it with two hands, bracing for impact. You are still reactive. $20,000 is a sword. It is leverage. It allows you to strike, to move, to dictate terms. If you've been following the Money Milestone series, you know the relief of that first 10,000. But having analyzed financial psychology for years, I can tell you that the second threshold is where choices stop being theoretical and become real. If you haven't seen episode 1, pause this, go back and watch it. It sets the foundation. If you are here for the breakthrough, hit that subscribe button right now. You need to understand the mechanism before you can use it. Now, let's dissect the shift. Here's the paradox I discovered the moment I hit five figures. The relief was real, but I still felt constrained. I felt tight. I was making $62,000 a year with $10,200 in the bank. On paper, I was winning. Mentally, I was still in the trenches. I was still operating from a place of deep scarcity. My manager approached me about a new leadership role. It sounded fantastic. A team of 3 people under me, more responsibility, high visibility. But it wasn't a new position. It was a restructuring. For all that extra stress, they offered me a $3,000 raise. That sounds good until you do the math. I would be working 20 to 30% more hours for a measly 5% increase in pay after taxes. The version of me living in scarcity, the version holding the shield, would have said yes immediately. More title, more experience, resume building. But something inside me hesitated. You might be thinking, why wouldn't you take that? It's growth. And that's fair. But I realized I was hesitating not because it was a bad move, but because I didn't have the financial margin to evaluate it clearly. My brain was still in survival mode. I told my manager I needed to think about it. And then I did something unconventional. I committed to reaching $20,000 as fast as humanly possible. Not because I wanted the number, but because my intuition screamed that once I hit that threshold, I would know, truly know, whether that role was right for me. Here is the number that should shock you. Only 28% of Americans have $20,000 in liquid assets. If you have 10,000, you're ahead of 65% of the country, but 72% of Americans are still stuck below that 20,000 line. Because of that, they're making the same career decisions, the same desperate life choices without the psychological freedom to choose differently. Why is this jump so psychologically violent? We are told financial security is proportional. More money equals proportionally more security. But that is not how your brain works. That is not how loss aversion works. Loss aversion is a principle stating that humans feel the pain of losing $1,000 twice as intensely as the joy of gaining it. This creates a bizarre, invisible dynamic. When you have $5,000, your brain isn't 50% as secure as when you have $10,000. Your brain has invisible thresholds, categories. Going from 0 to 2,000 is massive relief. But going from 15,000 to 20,000, that crosses you into a different mental universe. At 10,000, your brain whispers, one bad month, one medical emergency, one job loss, and you are back to 0. At 20,000, the whisper stops. Your brain stops calculating how fast you could lose everything and starts calculating what you could actually build. This threshold isn't arbitrary. 20,000 for someone making 40 to 80,000 a year is roughly 3 to 6 months of living expenses. That is the magic number where your brain actually believes, viscerally believes, that you could survive a crisis. Let me show you how this theory actually manifests in the real world. This is the moment I knew everything had changed. I had finally ground my way to that $20,000 mark. 6 months into that job, we got a new VP. He called an all-hands meeting in the main glass-walled conference room. The atmosphere wasn't just heavy, it was a physical assault on the senses. As soon as I stepped through the door, I was hit by the smell. A thick, suffocating cocktail of stale, burnt office coffee that had been stewing for hours, mixed with the sharp, metallic tang of high cortisol sweat. It's a very specific scent, acrid and sour, that only exists in corporate rooms where 50 people are simultaneously afraid for their livelihoods. The air conditioning was malfunctioning, humming with this low-frequency rattle that seemed to drill right into your temples, yet the room felt hot, sticky, and airless. A colleague sitting next to me was vibrating, literally vibrating. Her leg was bouncing under the table so hard it was shaking my water cup, creating tiny ripples in the plastic. Her eyes were locked on her phone, thumbs blurring as she doom-scrolled LinkedIn. The VP walked in. He didn't smile. He wore a suit that cost more than my car and looked like a predator scanning a herd for the weak link. The message was brutal. Reorganization, redundancies, streamlining. If you weren't vital, you were dead weight. My old self, the guy with $10,000, would have been sweating through my shirt. I would have felt the blood drain from my face, my heart hammering against my ribs like a trapped bird, mentally panic applying to jobs I didn't want while the VP was still talking. But the version of me with 20,000, I sat in that meeting, leaned back in my chair, and I felt stillness. It was a cold, predatory calm. While the AC rattled and the room smelled of fear, my brain was running a calm equation in real time. Okay, monthly expenses, $3,200. Weaponry, $20,000. I did the division in my head, 6.25. That number didn't just float in my mind. It felt like a physical weight being lifted off my chest. 6.25 months of absolute freedom. 6 months where I didn't have to answer to anyone. The math hit me like a rush of oxygen. I realized I didn't need to take the first desperation job. I could wait for the right job. That lack of panic is invisible to others, but it changes your physiology. It changes your posture. That isn't arrogance. That is leverage. That stillness paid off immediately. When they restructured my department, they asked if anyone wanted to manage the tech stack migration. It was high visibility, but high risk. A project graveyard where careers went to die. My scarcity mindset would have said no, too dangerous. But my abundance mindset asked, what's the budget? They told me. The conversation that followed was the first time I ever truly negotiated. It didn't sound like a plea. It sounded like a business transaction. My boss looked at me and said, it's a great opportunity for exposure. I didn't blink. I said, I agree, it's a critical project, but I've reviewed the scope. It's a 6-month commitment requiring weekend oversight and significant liability. I'm happy to lead it, but the current compensation structure doesn't align with that level of risk. He paused, looking confused. Well, we don't really have the budget for a full role change. I didn't interrupt him. I didn't rush to fill the void with apologies or justifications. I just let the silence hang there. 1 second, 2 seconds, 3. The silence expanded in the room, heavy and awkward. In the past, that pause would have made me crumble, but this time, I watched him squirm in it. Silence is painful when you're desperate, but it is the ultimate power move when you're secure. Finally, he broke. I said, I understand. However, to deliver this safely, I need full autonomy and a title adjustment to senior specialist effective immediately, with a salary correction to match the market rate for that role. If we can't do that, I'm happy to support whoever you choose to lead it. They said yes. Why? Because they could smell the confidence. They knew I wasn't bluffing. With 10,000, I would have been begging for the chance. With 20,000, I was naming my price. The only variable that changed was the number in my bank account. My skills were the same, my job was the same, but my negotiating power went from "please don't fire me" to "here is what I am worth." Let's apply this to you. Say you make $55,000. You have $10,000 saved. You see a job at another company offering a 20% raise, but it's a commute and a new environment. Without the cushion, you think, the risk isn't worth the stability I have now. You stay put. With 20,000, you think, that's 11,000 more a year. If it doesn't work out, I have the runway to fix it. You take the job. 2 years later, you're making 75,000. Same person, different risk tolerance. Or maybe you want a certification that costs $3,000. At 10,000, that cost looks like a threat to your safety. It looks like a hole in your shield. At 20,000, it looks like an investment with a 30% ROI. This is what opportunity cost actually means. It isn't just what you give up, it is what you can afford to pursue. At 10,000, you are protecting what you have. At 20,000, you are buying permission to take risks. Research shows people with over 20,000 in savings change jobs more frequently and negotiate better salaries, not because they're smarter, but because they can afford to walk away. Let's look at the compound effect. If you stay in your safe job because of fear, in 5 years you might go from 60,000 to 65,000. If you use your 20,000 cushion to take risks, jump companies, and negotiate aggressively, in 5 years you could be at 85,000. That is a completely different life trajectory, and it all starts with that second 10,000. So what do? First, stop thinking of the next 10,000 as savings. Think of it as purchasing your freedom. Second, audit the opportunities you are dismissing out of fear. Write them down. Ask yourself, would I do this if I had 20,000 in the bank? If the answer is yes, that is your signal. The path from 10,000 to 20,000 feels harder psychologically because you are constantly asking if the sacrifice is worth it. It is. Because once you cross that line, the next 30,000 becomes easier. You use your higher salary to save faster. Compounding starts working for you, not against you. The first 20,000 is breaking the chains. Everything after that is building the empire. However, there is a trap waiting for you. A trap that destroys 90% of people who finally reach this level of security. It's called lifestyle inflation, and it is the single fastest way to turn your new freedom back into slavery. In the next episode, I'm going to show you exactly how the lifestyle inflation trap works and why people making $100,000 are still broke. If you don't want to build this fortress just to burn it down in 6 months, you need to see that video. Subscribe now so you don't miss episode 3. If you were grinding toward that 20,000 right now, comment weaponry below. Let's build it together.